Hello and welcome everybody. So glad to have you join us today for our Public Libraries as Nature Connectors webinar. This is the first in a series of webinars we're hosting this fall focused on the emerging strategies from our Cities Connecting Children to Nature initiative, and maybe not even emerging anymore, some strategies that have been in place for a while now. And so my name is Monica Lopez-McGee, and I help lead the initiative for at the Children Nature Network. We're pleased to co-lead Cities Connecting Children to Nature and this webinar with the National League of Cities Institute for Youth Education and Families. To all of you, we're so glad to have you, and we thank you for your time and interest in this topic. We've actually been wonderfully surprised at the response and the number of library staff and city staff joining us. So hopeful that this provides inspiration and some ideas for you to carry forth in your city. Today's webinar will be exploring the ways cities can maximize library assets, partnerships, and resources to bring the benefits of nature to our local residents, youth and families alike. Libraries exist in neighborhoods across the country and serve as vital community hubs for information and connection. Before we begin, let me share a little bit more about our webinar format before we get into the content. All of our attendees are muted right now. We encourage you to contribute your questions using the question box that should be on the right-hand side of your screen. There's a drop-down menu where you can select to send your message directly to me, the moderator, or to everyone. I'll be gathering the questions along with my colleague Vera Feeney, who's on the line, for us to field at the end of the webinar. If there is a clarifying question, I may jump in to make sure everything is clear. Otherwise, we'll open the webinar to Q&A at the end. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording link will be shared with you so you can revisit the conversation or share it with your colleagues afterwards. To support our conversation and discussion of libraries as Nature Connectors today, I'm lucky to have with me Rebecca Ryan from St. Paul Libraries and Christy Estrovitz from the San Francisco Public Libraries. Let's take a moment to learn more about them. We'll kick off with Rebecca.
Hello and welcome, and thanks for having me on. I'm Rebecca Ryan. I'm a Public Services Manager for the St. Paul Public Library. Right now I oversee some libraries, our community services, and our bookmobile. But at the time period that I will be talking about, I was the library manager at our Sunray Library, where our Nature Smart library work started.
Excellent. Welcome, Rebecca. Thanks for joining us. Go ahead, Christy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christy Estrovitz. I have the privilege of managing youth services for the San Francisco Public Library, where I lead public programs and partnerships for ages birth to 18 and all of their caregivers and their community of support.
Excellent. Welcome. And so to kick us off, before we dive into the specifics about libraries, we want to provide a little bit of information of the genesis of our work here. And so for those of you joining for the first time, our Cities Connecting Children to Nature initiative supports city governments in more equitably connecting children to nature. We do this through technical assistance, peer learning, and pass-through funds and convenings and bringing people together for that peer learning and continued development. We work with cities to produce systemic change, so that comes through policies, infrastructure, and programs, and considering how we incorporate youth and resident voice into the program development and services that are provided within cities as they relate to nature connection. We're pleased to lead this effort in 18 cities, 7 of which started, which were piloted in 2014, and with support from the JPB Foundation. Some of and you can see on the map here, the 18 cities, and this is not limited to the number of cities out there incorporating nature connection, but to those currently engaged directly in our cohort. And these cities are pursuing a variety of strategies to more equitably connect children to nature. Across the 18 cities, we've seen 7 strategies really emerge with prominence. That includes green schoolyards, youth leadership development, early childhood nature play, and many others, including Nature Smart Libraries. And so this Nature Smart Libraries is, when we consider what the opportunity is, author and co-founder of the Children in Nature Network, Richard Louv, captures it really well when he says, libraries are but a perfect, if unexpected, institution to connect people to nature. This statement supported because libraries are geographically relevant. They exist in every kind of neighborhood, serve as community hubs, are often supported by friends groups, so have some infrastructure there for scaling opportunities, have existing resources and programming to build off of, and are adaptable and known for being safe. If you are a library staff or librarian, this is coming at no surprise to you. Just right prior to going online with the webinar, Rebecca, Christy, and I were reflecting on, we're coming at it from two different perspectives, from our city perspective of from our service from the Nature Connection and saying, oh, libraries are an amazing venue. And then from the flip side, for libraries to say Nature Connection, of course. And so that we're both having those moments, aha moments together. And Richard Louv goes on to say, by creating libraries with nature connections, we create a center for developing kids' intelligence, curiosity, and imagination. Books nurture learning and inner imagination, while play in nature engages the senses of curiosity and exploration critical to healthy brain development. Putting both of these essential childhood experiences in one place is a simple idea, but one that could have profound effects. And that is the aha moment that we were having and completely agree with. In support of this effort of libraries being venues for nature connection, the CCCN initiative created a Libraries as Nature Connector strategy tool. It's a one-pager that includes 2 local examples, the 2 case studies that we're going to hear from today, and it also describes some of the benefits and the ways that you can activate this on the ground. The strategy tool is found on the CCCN Resource Hub, and we invite you to use it as case studies and examples for you making the case if this is something you're interested in launching in your city or at your library. When libraries become venues for nature connection, we see benefits for the library, the community, and local partners, including the ability here to reach families of color and low-income families through a trusted neighborhood resource that's embedded in the community. We're able to maximize library facilities and resources through partnerships with park departments, increase regular access to nature for children, young adults, and families, and strengthen stewardship and expansion of library green spaces and adjacent parks and gardens. So library park partnership, which we're going to hear more about, really creates access both to increases opportunities to engage in the library and access to parks and green spaces. So excited to hear that. And that library park partnership is one of the ways that we see libraries activate. Some of the other ways that we see this happen, given that there is no one size fits all, we often say that libraries can choose and adapt how best to facilitate nature connection at their site. A modular approach of this kind is really initiated by engaging library patrons, families, and residents and youth in understanding their needs and interests so that the library can adapt to the resources they have on hand and that need of their community. A few of the ways that we're seeing libraries activate, we mentioned the library park partnership. We're seeing resource lending, which shows up as nature backpacks, even gear lending libraries and seed libraries as part of the lending repertoire. We're also seeing nature programming and activities, and sometimes that is libraries leading and facilitating that programming, and sometimes it is libraries partnering with a local nonprofit organization who might bring that expertise and be able to facilitate that type of programming within the library. And another piece that we see is youth development and youth leadership and engaging youth in libraries, not only the library programming, but then in the facilitation of it and in bringing in youth leaders as mentors, as interns, and really overall investing in that and using the library programming space to invest there. And so these are a few of the ways that a touch of how we see this manifesting, but both Rebecca and Christy will be sharing more about how this is showing up at their library and the ins and outs of what makes it work, both on the ground and at a city level and city partnership level. So here to kick us off first is Rebecca to share more about the work happening at the St. Paul Public Library. Rebecca, all yours.
Thanks, Monica and Christy. Yes, it just took me a minute to get my unmute button to work. I like to include a number of slides because they really jog my memory about the genesis of this work at the St. Paul Public Library, which was in 2014 when we were remodeling a number of our libraries, but most primarily for these purposes, the Sunray Library, which is on the eastern edge of St. Paul. And the library was located in a park. Over the years, it had kind of developed this bunker approach. Windows had gotten broken and then boarded over rather than replaced. So when I started managing this library, I quite frankly forgot that we were in a park half the time. We got into this work. I think it's fair to say that we had no idea where it would take us at the time, but we were working with Lawal Scott Erickson Architects, and Mohammed Lawal was on the board of the Children in Nature Network, and our library was a really exciting renovation opportunity because of this park connection, because of this nature connection that we could foster for the library and the neighborhood that really was not present before the renovation. So it was an amazing opportunity for both for us and for the Children in Nature Network to kind of test this idea about how does this work happen in libraries? Is there a connection there? And as I was telling Monica and Christy earlier, one of the notes that I have written for myself from that time was children and adults benefit from time spent purposefully outside, which back in 2014 when we started, I would have said, well, yes. And so what does that have to do with me, the library manager? Over, I think it was about the course of a year and a half, we worked very specifically with the Children in Nature Network to make something that capitalized on this amazing renovation that was happening in our space, and capitalized on some community engagement work that we were both doing, and some new ideas really for our library system and for our city. For example, we spend a lot of time collaborating with our partners in Parks and Recreation, but in the library, we were almost solely focused on the rec piece of that. And through our partnership with the Children in Nature Network, and because of some of the ways the grant funding at the time happened, we were also working with the Wells Fargo Green team. So suddenly we had a connection with the Forestry Department of Parks and Recreation, people who technically we work for the same organization. I had never spoken with them before. I had no idea of what they were talking about. And they were super excited to realize that the library was thinking about the space outside of their building, particularly in a lower income neighborhood in the city. They taught us about shade as an equity issue. And they were also like, oh, you disseminate information. We have these brochures. Could you put them in the library and give them to people? So there were just so many connections that happened with technically pieces of our same organization that we just didn't know what the the right hand and the left hand had no idea what they were doing. So while we were developing this approach, we were very purposeful in figuring out what our strengths were and what our real capacity was. So we leaned heavily into the strategy of the nature backpack. And so here's a picture of a couple of them. We have lots of resources, we have lots of programming, and we wanted to be able to lend people the tools that they might need to go enjoy nature close to home, maybe even the park right outside our doorway that now we could see than when we couldn't even see it before. So we thought about the idea of promoting the family nature clubs as well. It was just not something that we had the staff capacity to take on. However, another really important piece for us turned out to be the youth leadership piece of it, particularly from an equity lens. We had a group of young people that had been meeting in another area of the neighborhood, and then somewhat through this process with the Children in Nature Network came to be hosted in the library. And also through the community engagement process, we're really engaged in this idea of going outside and learning about nature and experiencing things that they had never had the chance to experience before. So for me, a piece of this work has been, when we started it, I was like, I think people in this neighborhood care about their kids' education and they care about digital inclusion, and I'm not really sure they care so much about nature. And through the community engagement work, through our work with the Young Mentors Group and Natural Leaders, it was eye-opening for me to hear people say, we would love to do that. We would love to go out into the park. We would love to go camping, but that is not something that we have the ability to do. There's barriers to us. Are we going to be welcome there? How will we get there? We don't have the money to pay for supplies, things like that. So it became a really important part for me in the library to think about how we can facilitate access for people who might historically not have had access to outdoor spaces or been comfortable in them. So another key piece of this, as you can see from some of the photos, was our work with the Wells Fargo Green Team and the forestry team of Parks and Rec. And we planted 50 trees in Conway Park. And because we were able to take advantage of a little bit of, thanks, extra money, we also put in a pollinator garden. It was something that people were talking about. It was something that we had space and we felt could enhance the outdoor learning of the library, which is being in Minnesota is not something that we necessarily think about all of the time. And I was realizing that I don't have updated photos of the pollinator garden, but it has expanded to fill like the entire, you can see in this picture, it's part of this green space in our parking lot. It's expanded to fill the entire parking lot. We have beehives, basically where the Parks and Rec truck is at the moment. So we've been able to really do a lot of active and passive programming outside just through our enhanced space. We also added a reading garden when we renovated the building, which I think is Richard Louv's kind of beautiful and very idealistic notion of a child reading under a tree. It's a nature smart library. And now we're actually able to facilitate that for our patrons. And it is beautiful, and it does take us in the library kind of switching our mindset about where learning happens at the library. I think that is, and as you can see, we can talk about this later in the further facilitated discussion portion of the program, but the initial impacts were around youth leadership, around lending materials, and around changing our space. But we went on to do a lot more around programming, and we went on to do a lot more around expanding the approach of Nature Smart Libraries to all of our libraries in St. Paul. So that even in the wintertime. So I think I will leave it there and I think turn it over to Christy.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. I'm so inspired by your work. So this is Christy again from San Francisco Public Library. I'm going to share with you one of my favorite partnerships, and it's a mighty one, I will say. So just a little bit of context. Many of you have hopefully visited San Francisco, and hopefully you've experienced our libraries. Our library system has 28 brick and mortar locations, including our main library. We have a 4-part mobile outreach services team. We have one outreach book bike, which is electric assist to navigate our many hills and lots of wind that we have in San Francisco. And we have a temporary site at the SF MoMA, Modern Art Museum. And we are relatively unique in such an urban environment where we have a dedicated library presence in every single neighborhood in San Francisco. We were also really honored by the 2018 National Library of the Year Award too, and we're still riding that wave and sharing that with our partners. Many of our partners, including the National Park Service and Presidio Trust and Chronicle Books, that I'll be talking about today, and the Friends of the Library wrote a letter on our behalf for the application. So we're really committed to our community, and we're really committed to this partnership. So parks and libraries are for all and forever. Parks here in San Francisco are national parks and also our city parks. They are free and open spaces, and many of them have public programming, and that's what brings us all together. Here I'm going to talk about our Friends of the San Francisco Public Library, which are our nonprofit arm, which raises funding for our public programming. The national parks that have a presence here with the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. The Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy is their Friends organization, and the Presidio Trust is right here in the Presidio. And Chronicle Books is our hometown publisher and our sister part. And the department of the city is our Rec and Park, and we have a growing partnership with them as well. So we hadn't really worked with our national parks before. We have actually access to 11 different national parks in the Bay Area, which was really quite amazing for our residents. However, our community doesn't always know that they're just within a couple of miles from a beautiful national park. So it was the centennial of the National Park Service that sparked a local conversation with the goal of really having greater thought and care to reach those non-users of parks, and in turn ended up being non-users of libraries as well. That's a really kind of a shared pocket of our direct community in San Francisco. We went into this first partnership meeting wondering, like, what could this be? And we walked out with just a really inspired conversation, just filled with such promise and hope for our community. We quickly realized their shared agreement and their intentionality was really on the same track as what we do in public libraries. And we had this connecting goal to provide experiences for our community, to bring our community together. So it started as a pilot, and we found that it really linked nicely with our summer learning program that we had been thinking intentionally about and trying to deepen our impact locally to reach students and their families. And so that's where we put our energy towards, and it aligned really nicely with the summertime celebration of the centennial as well. So with that, they had extra resources to bring in and take local field trips. The library serving as the hub and taking a free shuttle with whoever wanted to sign up in advance, and get on the shuttle together and go to a national park with a park ranger who gave them a guided experience in their local national park and then brought them back safely to the library. We also installed trailheads. So this is information with our summer graphics. We had a shared media campaign providing direct information about how to get to your local national park. We also had a ranger program in every single one of our locations as part of our summer program. And we also had little free libraries. And so our parks partners, we donated 11 of those, and those went directly into the national parks. And our Friends of the Library donated books for that. And Chronicle Books donated our summer book as well. And then we also had, you'll see in the corner there, Lena. She's one of our young rangers, and you'll see that game board is designed by artist Christian Robinson through our partnership with Chronicle Books, and that is a nature-inspired tracker to track all your reading and learning and exploring during the summer. So that's how it started, and our collaborations continued inside and outside the library. It really gave us a moment to rethink our summer offerings through nature connections and all the resources that our parks, specifically our national parks partners, were able to bring into the library because of this commitment to reaching non-users. You'll see their Ranger Talks at SF MoMA, our public knowledge library space. You see shared events like collaborative events in the parks. Most recently, our bookmobile is the center photo. That was at our culminating event with, it was a Books and Bikes Festival in the Presidio, and we had all of our bikes partners from San Francisco there, and our bookmobile and scraper bike team from Oakland coming over, and it was just a fantastic day and quite picturesque day to be in San Francisco. We also, you see below, there's a picture of a typical Ranger Talk where they bring in realia and ephemera from the parks. So kids, especially city kids who may not get out to their parks as often as they would like to, they get to have a sense of what's in their parks and spark their curiosity and make them feel comfortable going into their parks and spaces. Let's see. We also have had a very intentional, this is our 4th year partnership with the National Park Service and the team, of a shared campaign. So as mentioned, we work with Chronicle Books to commission original art out of a book, and that becomes our graphic campaign for our summer learning program. And we do transit shelters. This year we did over 100 in San Francisco, and that you see more and more nature elements. This was our first one that I Love My Library, designed by Christian Robinson, and we were so excited to see the nature embedded in these urban streets. It's really quite something. We've also, for 2 years, we've done a commissioned Ranger badge. This is authentic as it gets. We work with the same vendor that laser cuts the wooden badges for the National Park Services, where you can be a ranger and earn your badge in any national park. Well, at the library, you can become a reading ranger, and this year's designed by Zachariah O'Hara. We have a lot of fun playing with some of their cornerstone marketing pieces and making them kind of mashing it up with the public library. We were so intentional, every year it gets better, it gets deeper. We have really honest conversations with our partners about what's working. They have very consciously, they evaluate every single program that they do. So we learn a lot from that. And we've had some great debriefs with them about what's really working in our libraries, what's scaling back. So our Ranger programs have been historically youth focused, but we realized that a lot of adults and seniors are very interested in these topics too. So this year we're able to pilot that as well. So speaking of data, this is just a little bit of data that came out of last year's summer shuttle that actually was a boat ride. It was to Alcatraz. And last year was our first summer trying that because there was a lot of interest. And Alcatraz is, many of you have probably been, it's more of a tourist destination, and many San Francisco residents haven't had the opportunity to do that. But because of the public library and our summer learning program and our collaboration with the parks, our residents were able to participate and go to Alcatraz as a group and meet new friends. So this is just some of the data from the shuttle program last year. Every year we do a summary, a really beautiful display of what the data looks like on our end and their end. This is just an example from 2 years ago. And we're always thinking about the sustainable path. We are many different agencies working around this to reach more and more of our community, to provide experiences and really build those connections in San Francisco and provide access to resources and break down those barriers. And on this path, we are thinking every year intentionally, what happened? What did we do? What did we learn? How did we really impact this city and providing more nature opportunities? And how can we scale this for other systems and other communities? So we're gearing up for that as we've closed our summer program. And we're really excited about our city partnership with our Rec and Park Department. This is something that we've been growing. We have a long-standing program where Bookmobile goes into a couple of the city parks and does story time once a month. And we had Rec and Park join our annual Dia de los Niños event in one of our city parks as well. And we're really excited to see where this goes in the next year or so. In fact, our library is at a city park today doing a Nature Connection event today at McLaren Park. If you'd like to learn more, this is a whole host of videos and documentation about our partnership, also a pod call from this summer where you can hear Kate Wang from the National Park Service talking about her perspective on our partnership. There's a really fun interview about what's my library book doing in the national park, and that's really focusing on our story walks that have been embedded in several of the national parks, and short PSAs, one featuring a national park ranger as well. With that, I just want to say that libraries and parks are for everyone, and it's a living part of what we're doing in San Francisco Public Library. And we're excited to see what's next in this partnership. So with that, I'm sending it back to Monica.
Yes, well, thank you both for sharing. I think, I heard so many big takeaways. One is that the libraries exist, beyond the four walls, and how libraries can extend into the community. In your case, Christy, with the Alcatraz trips to local parks, and in Rebecca in St. Paul with, just the city park that was right next door. And so wonderful to see kind of this idea of parks of libraries extending into nearby spaces and beyond their walls. And so also wanted to offer this, I heard quite a bit about partnerships, and there's a few questions in the chat box we'll get to about that too. Before we dive into partnerships, I'm interested to hear, going back to Rebecca, that this initiative was grounded in the city, and I'm interested to hear how the St. Paul Public Libraries engage city leadership, and to what extent that helped to advance your effort in implementing Nature Smart Libraries.
Well, we were really lucky in that our mayor in 2014, Chris Coleman, was really, really interested and engaged with the idea of connecting children and families to nature. But I think it speaks to the enduring energy of the idea and the sustainability of it, that we have a new mayor, we have a new strategic plan, and since our initial days in 2014 at Sunray, we now have 5 Nature Smart libraries. We have some goals in our newest strategic plan that really line up with what we're trying to do. Some common themes that I heard with Christy are that show up in our strategic plan are establishing the library as the best place in St. Paul for families to learn together, and creating equitable, impactful, and playful learning experiences for young learners aged 0 to 18. And those are pieces that resonate strongly with our current mayor and with our current library director. So we have we've now engaged several sets of city leaders with this idea, and I think it hits on things that cities are looking to do, is to advance equity, to consider their infrastructure, to consider partnerships across departments, and to maximize those scarce public dollars.
Yeah, I definitely start to think of, how you can, that elements for sustaining that programming. And we'll talk a little bit also about expanding to other sites, right, from the pilot. Before we do that, both of you mentioned partnerships, and Christy, Summer Strides is based on this partnership with the National Park Service. How are partnerships, you noted this a little bit in your presentations, want to dig in a little bit more about how partnerships have helped to increase your capacity to reach more families and children?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Thinking at like a marketing level, with our summer program, this is the largest literacy campaign that our library presents. So we spend a lot of time thinking about what this looks like and who the intended audience is. It's for everyone, and we hold student learning in the center of this. So when we found out that our parks, we knew we were going to do this, and we found out like, oh, they would be sharing the same message with their constituents. The Parks Conservancy, their mailing list is 100,000 people. That's a lot more than our mailing list. So we're like, wow. So this campaign is reaching new people. And from the first year that we started partnering with them, we saw an 78% increase in the number of people participating in our Summer Stride program. And if we look back to the year before, we've grown 126% in our reach.
That's amazing.
It's just amazing. So I've always believed in the power of partnership and them understanding what the library is and what it means to them personally and also for their organization. And this is definitely a living example of the power of partnership and deeper reach in your community.
Definitely. We see a question in the chat box about partnerships with garden clubs from Tanya Swanson. Has either of you had experience with partnering with local garden clubs or local other environmental education, nature-based nonprofits?
Yes. We have partnered both with garden clubs and with nature-based nonprofits. This is Rebecca in St. Paul. And I would say they've both been fruitful in different areas. In fact, we've had some garden volunteers that actually have taken a little bit more management maybe than we would have liked. They get to, let's just say they were very zealous in the plantings and what kind of insects there were and kind of how far it should reach. But definitely we couldn't do the pollinator garden at Sunray without garden volunteers. And actually a lot of the programming that was most impactful for our kids and families, we did in partnership with a local nonprofit called Urban Roots. They helped us design and maintain the pollinator garden, and they helped us do some kind of indoor-outdoor programming where the library did the literacy and reading piece and they did the outdoor activity piece. We had, there were some photos earlier in the presentation, we had a winter survival program that was amazing in its ability to reach kind of all of like my sort of kid constituencies at the library, right? So we have the kids who come for homework help, and we have the kids who come because they're readers, and then we have the kids who come because they're a little bit more footloose and fancy free and they want to just play on the computers. And the winter survival program engaged all of those kids. So we were able to give the kids who had plenty of unstructured time a more structured approach to being in nature. And then the kids who were leading a more sort of programmed life had some unstructured playtime to create snow forts and to think about if you were stuck in a blizzard, how would you survive? And it remains one of my favorite programs that we've ever done in the library. And it got kids to read books who weren't normally interested in reading books. And it was just, and we couldn't have done it without Urban Roots. And I'm not sure that we would have really been able to figure out how to partner with them without building the nature connection. So.
Yeah, wonderful to hear that type, and some ways to be mindful of it.
Yeah, in San Francisco, we have a couple of community gardens outside of or on the same premise as our branches, and it is the gardening groups that have helped really be ambassadors for this in our community, and also volunteers and provide their expertise and help grow in these gardens and giving back.
Yeah. And Christy, I'm curious to also hear from you, in part of these partnerships and connection, and resource building that's happening. And this is true for St. Paul too, so we'll extend it to Rebecca afterwards. Interested to hear from you. Both of you started with, a small pilot or a pilot in St. Paul at one library, and then expanded, and in San Francisco, really, summer, and hearing about how it's growing to year round and more libraries participating. Can you share a little bit with us about that process and what it took and what it has taken to scale up?
Yeah, that's a great question, Monica. Our programs really started as a pilot in 2016 with the Centennial, and it was through the unanimous support from the park rangers, seeing the potential that they were really drivers in sharing with their peers. So the next year it expanded to Marin County, and soon after that, San Mateo County. So in the larger Bay Area region, applying the same model of ranger talks and shuttles, and yet customized to meet the local need and interest of the communities there, and partnering with the public libraries. We're both really steeped institutions, so we try to be as nimble as we can, but we're also really transparent and sharing. I think that's part of being a public library, a public servant. So we had very easy conversations and debriefing about what really worked and what we need to tweak to improve the service to better serve. And in fact, our park rangers went so far as to create a survival guide for working with public libraries and doing ranger talks, shuttle programs, story walks, and so forth. And it was really an amazing document of our partnership and kind of the tricks of the trade and the best practices to pass on to other institutions.
I'm so jealous of that shuttle program.
I definitely encourage everybody to go back and watch the video, especially the first one, because there are citizens, San Francisco residents, who've never seen the ocean. We are surrounded by ocean. We've never seen Ocean Beach. And some people saw whales for the first time. Like, these are transformational experiences that we're providing. And they're sharing them not just with their grandmother who's with them, but like with the whole, like a bigger part of their community. It's truly magical.
Well, and I think you hit on the way, I would say the primary way that this gets spread and scaled to libraries or the citywide effort is that it is magical, and people do want to facilitate those connections. And once you see it in action, it's hard to not want to do it for yourself. So I would say there were certainly a lot of people who heard about the efforts at Sunray and were like, oh, we could do that at our library. And then another just really practical piece of how it spread from one library to a citywide effort was that our staff move around, right? So the children's specialist who was working with me at Sunray to really think about the nature backpacks and nature play story times now works at the Merriam Park Library. So just through staff movement, we've facilitated people who have learned about this primarily at Sunray and taken it to their next gig at another St. Paul Public Library. And as Christy, I think, was talking about, it's really easy to imagine how this fits into summer learning programs. Our Summer Spark program this year has, we've been doing Spark camps. So they had a nature camp at Merriam Park. I believe they also did some nature activities at Sunray. We do modern butterfly releases. We do nature play story times. There's some science museum kits that have come into play. There's a trading place at one of our libraries for kind of natural, rocks and things like that people can come and say, I found this, now look at it. So I think it, in part because we were pretty intentional about how can we do this through active and passive programming in a way that feels sustainable for staff, we were able to do that in all of our libraries and connect with our parks department citywide folks in a way that had been a little bit harder before. And shout out to the parks department for having vans and being able to take people places. So people went on a birding walk from one of our libraries. At another of our libraries, the teens partnered and went on a fishing trip. So yes, I think the inspiration of seeing people connect with nature has made it a really easy kind of sell to the rest of the city and the rest of our libraries.
Yeah. And what are, in terms of that expansion to other libraries, what are maybe some pieces in place? You know, my understanding is the library now has dedicated staff for support of this, and as you mentioned, some funding. Like, what are some of those dedicated pieces that help to sustain it in that growth?
I guess for San Francisco, it's really, you know, this is our, since it's connected, our parks partnerships are really like embedded into our summer learning program, which is system wide. It's been pretty clear that it aligns with our goals of our program. So it's just naturally embedded in that. The shuttles, like we have a running list of branches eager to sign on for a shuttle, which we've expanded outside of the summer months to create a longer season and more opportunities for our community. And we're going to continue to do that in the coming years. Yeah, but we haven't actually added any new staff for this partnership. Yeah, we're doing it all because I think we all believe in it and know how much this means to our community.
I would second that. That we have people who are point people, and it also helps to have a branding, so an umbrella that different programs can fall under.
Yeah, and that goes to maybe a question we have in the chat box that, you know, asks a little bit of, you know, I'm trying to look for the specific question, but the question was to the extent of how do you make the case for nature connection at libraries? And, you know, the two of you just touched on that, right? That it really stems from, you know, inspiration and some motivation by individuals who are seeing and witnessing that experience. Are there any other you know, pointers you might provide in terms of that question of how you make the case for it?
In San Francisco, we have a lot of nature programs already. When we bring in, like, I would consider even like our petting zoo would be a nature program inside or on the library property, especially for urban kids who may not see a lot of live animals besides pigeons. And it's really important that they're able to have a real experience with llamas and chickens and, you know, farm animals, and where they can see and smell and touch them and have a connection with living things. There's something about the safety of the library space as a welcoming hub for the community. So we're naturally positioned to do this and be the conveners for nature conversations and experiences. We, you know, most public libraries they have like other nature programs they bring in, like snakes and reptiles, and we have NorCal bats that comes in, and they're really popular summer programs. But I think if public libraries can look deeper at their existing programs to see, like, they may already be doing something in their program, and maybe highlight that and get feedback from their community of like, what other opportunities could we provide for you to deepen your connection with nature. And sometimes it's just taking a walk around your neighborhood and pointing out the greenery and the flowers, and taking a sensory walk together as a group. That could be a starter, and it's free.
Definitely. We know that I also wanted to put out there, I mentioned at the beginning of the call, Libraries as Nature Connection Strategy Tool. We also hope that document for libraries to leadership or to funders to in support of, you know, how and why libraries are, you know, wonderful venues for nature connection. We've shared quite a bit about this library perspective and the way they've incorporated. of our audience here is from the nonprofit sector as environmental educators and nature-based nonprofits, these leadership development, or nonprofit dedicated leadership. We're curious to navigate connecting to their local branch libraries. We're having some difficulty in audio.
So it looks like, Monica, we're having some audio difficulty. It looks like the question is how others can connect to libraries. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
So public libraries are in every city, urban and rural. I really think that public libraries of today are really open to new partnerships and conversations. I know our institution is, and I'm happy to connect anyone who's on here to a contact in their local library if they'd like an introduction. Even if I don't know them, I'd be willing to make that offer, because public libraries of today are really about being part of the community, the fabric of the community, and bringing people together through public programs and access to resources.
Thank you, Christy. Hopefully my audio is a little bit better now. I'm trying to do some work over here. I think that's a wonderful offer. Okay, glad to hear it's better. And Rebecca, any pointers for you for these, nature-based organizations focused on youth leadership development, for them to connect with local libraries? We may have lost her. Okay. We have a couple more questions here from the chat box. I want to give some time for. One of the questions here is about funding. And so we've touched a little bit about funding, and you've even noted kind of how some of these programs and efforts you can lift off the ground with little funding. And I know Chrissy touched on the NPS grant opportunity, or the partnership grant funding that was there. What are some other funding mechanisms that you might recommend for folks? This question in particular is about greening the grounds themselves.
I would definitely, I know our library system, we're entering our budget planning season, so we have a conversation with our local rec and park about what do we want to do and what are the necessary resources to do that, so we can bed it into our budget for next year. There are some things that are pretty low cost that you can do. For shuttles, that's all funded by our national parks through the Parks Conservancy. They're a nonprofit who really see this. And also many of the shuttles on the weekend are from the Presidio Go, which is our free shuttle that runs during the work week. And they have fewer shuttles on the weekends. So they use one of those for San Francisco-based shuttles. So that's been one way they've been able to tap into their existing resources. But I know they're also considering doing some more fundraising around to provide more shuttle opportunities, because those are really, really popular, wildly popular for sure. There's also, for public libraries, the IMLS grant opportunities are open right now. You can also look locally at the state level for LSTA grants as possible resources. And for city libraries, thinking into I know our city has like a zero recycling, like trying to get down to like net zero and some citywide campaigns that are very much about greening, and nature programs fall into that environmental awareness. So I think there are resources out there if you just start looking around.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that. And lots to tap in that you've noted there. And, you know, we had talked about that IMLS grant and the focus that it has right now, specifically on community connection and being community relevant, and feel that, you know, for all of you out there that are, you know, at libraries looking for funding, that community connection opportunity is really the foundation of this nature connection, that your programming and services nature connection are reflective of, you know, your community interests. So absolutely. We have many, many more questions in the chat box, not all of which we'll have time to get to. Please know that any questions that are in the chat box that we are not able to address during this webinar, that we will take note of them and follow up over email with a link to the recording, with responses to any questions from the chat box that we didn't get to, and with notes of all the resources that have been mentioned, and even the links that are in this webinar for you all to access. Specifically, there has been several inquiries about the survival guide for rangers. So we will be sure to follow up on those interests. So coming up on the hour, I just want to thank Christy and Rebecca for your time today, sharing your expertise with our audience. Thank you, to really appreciate it. I know that, you know, this is something that I've been following for quite some time, and you know, with these stories, I continue to learn more and understanding both needs of the library and the opportunities for partnerships and funding and all else around this. The opportunity for libraries to incorporate more nature-based programming and services. And so thank you also for our webinar participants. Lots of great questions in the chat box and comments in really expanding upon today's discussion and informing the ongoing development of libraries and nature connectors for creating equitable access to nature. Really appreciate it. As I mentioned, we'll be emailing a link to the webinar recording, as well as any mention of all the materials and resources that were mentioned. I also want you to look to Children in Nature Network as a partner in this work. Our organization offers technical assistance to help libraries become nature connectors. And for that, we'll also include it in that follow-up email, but you can reach out to me, Monica at childreninnature.org. And so we also invite you to stay connected to our Cities Connecting Children to Nature initiative through registration and attendance of this webinar. It includes subscription to the newsletter. If you may opt out to unsubscribe from the newsletter at any time, but we hope that you find it helpful in staying connected and learning more about the many resources that are related to this topic and strategy. I also want to share with you other ways for staying connected. We have a Cities Connecting Children to Nature resource hub, where at childrenandnature.org, where you can tap into both the Nature Smart Library, Libraries as Nature Connector strategy tool, and many other resources for strategies cities are employing to help bring equitable access to nature. We also have a few more upcoming webinars. We have on September 23rd, the Cities Engaging Youth as Nature Advocates webinar, and invite you to register for that. Once again, a link will be provided, as well as a webinar on October 24th focused on enhancing public spaces with nature. Some of the strategies that we're seeing really active in our cities, in our city cohort, and invite you to learn more from them. As the webinar concludes, we ask that you complete our brief 3-question survey to provide feedback and tell us what you'd like to learn more about in more upcoming webinars. And so in the meantime, please don't hesitate to reach out to us to ask questions. Really appreciate your participation. Have a wonderful day. And thank you again, Christy and Rebecca. So appreciative of your time and insights.
Thanks, Monica, for the opportunity. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Thanks, all.